In this module, we'll talk about uploading data into Maps Engine. In particular, we'll take a look at the list of available options for you to upload data into Maps Engine. We'll also review the supported data formats for both vector and raster data sources. We'll touch on some of the steps involved during the upload process and also discuss the automatic processing that gets sparked off right after successful upload of data sources. And in the end, we'll talk about what an image mask is and why do we need to apply masking when working with imagery data. Let's start with upload options. We have three options. The first one, single dataset upload. As the name suggests, it allows you to upload a single vector or image dataset at a time. One dataset typically comprises of multiple files. So single dataset does not mean a single file. It allows you to upload one dataset at a time, which could be a bunch of files, but you're not allowed to specify more than one dataset in an operation. For that, you have the next option, which is the folder upload. The folder upload option allows you to upload multiple datasets at a time. Let's say you're working with a lot of imagery data sources, and you may have them available in a folder. So what you could do is start a folder upload operation and point to where the imagery files are located. And so what this is going to do is it's going to upload all the data sets in one single operation, each of which will again typically comprise of multiple files. When working with vector and some of the imagery data sources, typically the single and folder upload options are enough, and these two options are available from within your console. So I'm in my Maps Engine console, and here is the upload icon. I'll click on that, and option number one, upload source files, is the single upload option, which allows me to upload single data set at a time. And the second option is the upload folder option, which allows me to upload multiple data sets in a single operation. Apart from that, the folder upload also allows me to upload a mix of data sets. So it does not have to be all imagery or all vector, but it could be a mix of data sources. Now, these two options are available in the console. However, sometimes when you're working with imagery sources, for example, it could run into gigabytes and terabytes in size, or you could just have way too many of them. And so even with the folder upload option, it could be a really long, time-consuming process, or you may easily hit the limit. Most browsers have a limit of anything ranging from 2 gig to a maximum of 10 gig that we support over the browser. And so when you're working with really big data sets, these two options will not be useful. For these particular use cases, we have the third option, which we call the bulk upload. Now, this option is not available over the console, as we just saw. And for this to work, you will need to get deployment team support, because this would require them to do some kind of setup before you can start uploading your data. So it is, like I said, only for specific use cases where you're working with huge data sets of imagery data, and so you will need to get deployment team approval and them to help you set up before you can upload your imagery data. Typically what happens in this case is you're trying to get your imagery data into your account, not going through the console, so you're bypassing the console. And so we'll need that kind of setup to be done in order for us to transport our data from where it's currently located into Maps Engine. Once that's done, these items, or assets rather, will still appear together with all the other data sets that you may have uploaded directly through the console through the single upload or the folder upload option. Let's take a look at the supported data formats for both vector and raster data sources. For vector, we support SRE shape files, we support CSV file, and for CSV files, they have to be accompanied by the virtual driver file, the .vrt file. We also support KML, so anything with .kml or even .kmz. And last but not the least, we support mapinfo tab files for vector data sources. For raster sources, we support JPEG 2000, GeoTIFF, TIFF, merge to SID, and even for imagery that do not have projection information embedded, we allow you to input an accompanying .prj file along with the imagery data source. We also do support the usage of network links for KML files. What this means is that you may sometimes have your KML files hosted on an external server, and instead of having you to upload them into Maps Engine, we allow you to create links pointing to these data sources already hosted externally. Now, when you create these network links for externally hosted KML files, they would appear as a layer when you ultimately include them in a map. However, the only caveat right now for KML network links is that you will only be able to visualize the data coming from the KML files through the network links in Google Earth clients. We do not support it through other clients, for example, using the built-in map viewer or through the Earth plugin for now. Right, just to show you a glimpse of what the UI looks like when using the single upload option. In this example, we're uploading a vector data set, which is a shape file, and the other accompanying files are also listed right here. So this data set is made up of 4 files, starting with the shape, and we also have the .shx, .dbf, and the prj files. So all the files have to be available and part of the same upload operation. You would give this upload a name, which will be ultimately the name of the data set once upload and processing is done. The next thing you want to do is choose from this drop-down list which access list, or rather, to be more exact, which editor access list will this data set be shared with. This will decide which group of people will be able to edit this data set or use this data set in a layer in future. You can also specify additional metadata like description and tags, and I find tags very useful because over time the number of data sets will grow in your Maps Engine account. And so to make it easily searchable, you want to give your data sets meaningful tags. When you use the search option from within the console, you'll be able to specify these tags, which will make it easier for you to sieve through the hundreds of data sets which you may have at a point in time and allow you to get to the required data set very, very easily. Just some limits on the length of the name for the data set, description, and tags, which is listed here. Again, in this single upload operation, you're only allowed to upload one data set in a single operation, but typically a data set will comprise of multiple files. And so one of the common mistakes is forgetting to include all the files, which will cause the upload operation to ultimately fail. Just to compare what the UI looks like for uploading a single imagery data set, here's a screenshot. The name and the access list to be shared with remains the same, like what we saw in the previous slide. However, for imagery data, we also need to specify the attribution, which is basically acknowledging the source of the imagery data. Chances are that the data that you're uploading may have been acquired from a third-party provider, and so you need to have already created an attribution entry from within your console for that agency or authority from which you acquired the imagery data sources. And so once you've created the attribution entry, it will appear in this drop-down list so that it's easier for you to just use this drop-down list to choose from a list of attributions that have been already created beforehand. Apart from that, just like with vector data set, you can specify additional metadata like description and tags. In addition to that, you also can specify for imagery data the date acquired if you have that information handy. One of the common mistakes in single upload is to include more than one data set, and so if you did that, this is the kind of error pop-up that you will notice within your console. And it's kind of obvious, and what you will want to do is make sure that you have included only one data set. Now just going back very quickly to one of the earlier slides, if you notice, although this data set is made up of 4 files, each of the file has the same file name but a different extension. And so this is how the upload feature detects whether there's more than one data set. I'm not saying that you can't fool it, but ultimately during the processing stage, you will still result in an error if you try to rename files to match them according to the file names. So you want to make sure that you only do one data set at a time with a single upload. If you need to upload multiple data sets in a single operation, you can use the folder upload option. Another common mistake that we see a lot is missing out on one of the files that is part of the data set. And so if that had happened, you will see in the data details page, which I will show you very soon, an X on the icon or on the thumbnail generated for that data set. And upon clicking on that, you will be able to sieve down to the error message, which will tell you something like this. So the only thing to do here is make sure that you add on the missing files and try to upload and process it one more time. Hopefully this time it goes through. Before we take a look at folder upload, let's go back to the console just to show you the data sources section. So you can go into data sources, and here is one of the data sets that I had uploaded. The fact that the thumbnail does not have an X across on the top right is an indication that the upload and the processing that kicked off right after went on smoothly and it was successful. And so if I click on this thumbnail, it will bring me to the data details page that I just mentioned. So in the data details page, you will be able to see the details that you had provided when uploading the data set. For example, the name, the tags, the description, and so on and so forth. Apart from that, somewhere along the middle of the page, you will also be able to check out the metadata for the data set that you just uploaded. For example, what kind of geometry is this data set describing, how many features, how many bad features, what is the most ideal bounds, which is basically the viewport if you were to display all of the features contained in this data set on a map. The metadata is slightly different for that of an imagery data source, and we'll take a look at that in just a while. Right at the bottom is the list of files that make up the data set and their sizes. So now that we've taken a look at single upload, let's move on to folder upload. The initial UI is slightly different, and again, let's go back to the console and show you how to do that. I'm going to click on this upload icon and choose folder upload option. In the folder upload option, you will point it to the directory where your data sources are located. I can just point to that particular directory, and all the data sets that are available within this directory will be detected, and it will give me a breakdown of how many vector data sets and how many imagery data sets were found. However, for each of these data sources, you will still need to go through the same process like what we did in the single upload. You will still need to give it a name, a bunch of tags, a description, and for imagery data, you will need to specify the attribution and if you have information on the acquired date. Like I mentioned earlier, with the folder upload option, you can upload multiple data sets in one single operation. It is pretty handy when you're working with a large collection of imagery data sets. It also allows you to upload a mixture of content type. For example, you have a folder with a mix of vector and imagery data sets, so the folder upload option will allow you to do so. The other great thing about the folder upload option is that it's non-blocking. So what's going to happen is when you start this upload process, it will pop up a box that kind of shows you the status of the overall upload process so far. And while this is happening, you can do other things on the console. For example, you can start creating a layer for some of the other already uploaded and processed data files or data sources, and various other things that the console allows you to do while this particular upload operation is happening in the background. And I also mentioned that for each data source, you will still need to specify the metadata information. And so by checking on each of this, you will see a UI similar to something like this, and you will still enter all this metadata before you can start the overall upload process. The location of where the data files and data sets could be located could either be local, or it could also be from an external source which is mounted onto your machine. However, one thing to be careful about is that we expect, irrespective of whether it's local or a mounted point, we expect all the files that are available to be real files and not symbolic links. We do not support symbolic links, and so if there are files that are pointed to by links, we will not be able to process that, and this will result in errors during the upload phase. If there are certain file types that are invalid, we will simply ignore them. We will not cancel out the overall job. So whatever files for those particular data sets were considered invalid, those data sets will fail, but every other data set with the correct number of files and valid file types will still go through the upload process and the processing that kicks off right after. A word about projections. We support upload of data in projections that is in compliance with all that's supported by GDAL or Proj 4. When working with imagery, after you upload and the processing that gets kicked off right after, part of this processing will convert imagery data sources from whatever projection they're in into WGS84 for further processing and storage within Maps Engine. Also, as you add these data sources to layers and ultimately share them out through the map, on their way out, depending on how you view them, they will either be reprojected to WGS84 when using Google Earth Client or the Earth plugin, for example, so basically 3D, or they'll be projected to the Mercator projection when you view them overlaid on top of 2D map. You could also use a WMS compatible client to access the published data using the WMS endpoint, and the data will be available in the same projections that we talked about. However, you can also access the WMS endpoint to extract the image and use your client application to further reproject this into any other projection if you choose to do so. Now that we've seen how single upload option and folder upload option work, let's take a look at some of the watch points when working with some of the specific data formats. The first one, CSV and VRT files. Now, CSV files are flat tables that may or may not contain spatial information as part of their attributes. For files that do have spatial information, we will need an accompanying .vrt file, which is a driver file that helps us read this spatial information. A snippet of what the VRT file may look like is given here on the slide. And when working with this data format, there are two things to watch out for. First of all, the VRT file that is going to accompany the .csv file will have to have this attribute called report source column. And the next thing to make sure is this attribute must be set to false. Now, like I mentioned, this VRT file kind of helps to read the spatial information that's available within the CSV file. And so part of this spatial information could be things like, for example, vertices of a polygon that is supposed to be charted out on a map. And so sometimes the number of these vertices could be really big. And so chances are that you may have an attribute value that's way too long for it to appear in an info window. So what happens is when you do not set this attribute to false, the content of the geometry attribute will start appearing in info windows. Now, one or two things could happen. Either the value for the geometry fields will be way too long, so you will get errors, or if it's not long and fits within the 4096 character limit, you will still see a lot of geometry information that typically you don't want to display within an info window. And so to avoid either of these things to happen, you want to make sure that when you're working with CSV and VRT files, you want to make sure that this particular attribute is highlighted, that means it's available in the VRT file, and it's been set to a value of false. When working with KML files, one thing to watch out for is the type of geometry available within the KML file. So typically KML files could specify one or more point data, line string, polygons, or could be a combination of these types of geometries. In Maps Engine, we allow one or multiples of one type of geometry. So if the KML file starts with a point feature, Maps Engine expects all the other features that follow to be of the same geometry type. If that is not the case, the upload and processing operation will fail, and you will be able to notice that in the data sources section once you click on the thumbnail. And so what you want to make sure of is that if you have files with a mix of geometry types, you want to make sure that you separate the geometry types so that each KML file will only have one type of geometry. For example, let's say all point features, and you want to upload them as 3 separate data sets. Ultimately, if they had belonged to one particular data source, you will still be able to bundle them as individual layers, but as part of the same map. Another thing about KML files is that there could be some style options provided as part of the KML file. So this will typically be ignored or lost. However, you'll be able to make use of the style editor available within your vector layers to apply styling onto your features. So let's take a look at some numbers when uploading vector and imagery data sets. For vectors, the maximum file size is 1 gig, and each file can go up till 1 million features. And the total number of vertices altogether overall for all features is 5 million, and you can go up till 550 attributes. So sometimes you may be working with vector data sets that may very well go beyond this 1 million features. So again, what you want to do is break it into sets of 1 million features, upload them as separate data sets. You will still need to create individual vector layers for each of these data sets. However, when you create the map, you can bundle all these individual vector layers as part of the same map. You even have the option of displaying all the individual layers as one single source, so that the viewer may not be able to distinguish between all the layers, and they would appear as if they came from one single source. Also, when you upload vector data sets, another thing to be careful about is the number of bad features. Sometimes a mismatch in the kind of value that could be there for one of the attributes will make a feature invalid, and so what happens here is these features will be recorded as bad. So as long as you are within these limits, Maps Engine will consider the smaller of either half the number of features or 100, whichever is smaller, as the maximum allowed number of bad features. Anything beyond this number will cause the upload and processing job to fail, and you will need to work through your data to make sure that the number of bad features is within the smaller of either of these two numbers. For the feature attributes, we support UTF-8, ShiftGIS, or ISO 8858 formats. However, upon upload and processing of the vector data set, they will all be converted into UTF-8 format when stored within Maps Engine. Although these numbers are correct as of the time we were making this video, these numbers may change in the future, and so it's always a good idea to get into the Help Center and take a look at the section that describes these numbers. I'm going into the Help Center for Maps Engine, and I've kind of linked it directly to the page that describes the numbers that we just went through for vector data sets. And we have a similar section if you scroll down for imagery data sets as well. For imagery data set, there is a maximum of 10 gig except for GeoTIFF, which is 4 gig. Also, you want to take note that some browsers may apply lower limits. For example, some browsers only allow up till 2 gig of uploads. And so if you have these restrictions, you may want to consider using Chrome browser, for example, that will allow you up till 10 gig of uploads. As for processing, that gets kicked off right after the upload stage. There is a maximum file size limit of 100 GB. So what happens is, after you upload your imagery data set, it gets converted into uncompressed format. For example, let's say you've uploaded them in Mr. Sid. They will be uncompressed into a raw format, and so as long as that format is within 100 gig limit, processing will continue. Anything beyond this limit will cause the processing to fail. As of now, we only support 8-bit images, so anything else will again result in a processing error. So you want to make sure that at the end of every upload job, once the processing kicks off, you want to check once the processing is done if the processing went on fine, and you'll be able to take a look at this again by going into the data sources page, clicking on the thumbnail and going into the data details page of that data set. So go into the data sources. Right now I only have an example of a vector table, but let's say if you had imagery data source, you would click on that and you'll be able to see details within the data details page. Again, you want to always make sure with the Help Center documentation to make sure that you're looking at the most updated numbers. It's always a good idea to follow the Help Center documentation on supported data formats and the limits available for these data formats. Alright, so I've been talking about the fact that there is a processing stage that gets kicked off right after the upload of the data sets is finished. And so let's describe this in slightly more detail. So after you upload your vector or imagery data sources, once they're uploaded successfully, the upload process kicks off an automated processing stage, and a bunch of things happen during this part. We will convert projections and data formats to what Map Engine is able to handle for further processing. During this stage, we also generate thumbnails, which are what you will see when you get into the data sources section. We go through the features, for example, for a vector data set and make sure the number of bed features does not go beyond the limits that we just discussed. So all these things are happening, so data is being sanitized, there's a bit of conversion going on, but typically this part shouldn't take too long. Again, it also depends on the size of the data set that you've just uploaded. Also, as an end result of this, you'll be able to take a look at the details of the upload cum processing stage in the data details section by clicking on each of the thumbnails of the data sets that you've uploaded. And just to show you what it looks like, we just saw this within the console. For a vector data set, you will have the metadata that you provided during upload. You will also have a preview in a thumbnail format of the data set that you uploaded. In this case, it gives you the bounds where your data is contained. This is for a vector data set. Somewhere in the middle of the page, you'll be able to take a look at the metadata for this vector data set. And right at the bottom, you will see the list of files. A similar data details page for the image sources available right here. So same information like for the vector data set, you will see tags, description, names, and so on and so forth that you provided during upload. The metadata, however, for the imagery data source is rather different. Here we describe the bands, the image size, maximum zoom, resolution, and also bounds within which the imagery would fit. So this would be the most ideal viewport if you want to look at the image that is contained within this data source. And of course, the list of files that make up the data set. On the right hand side, you can see the thumbnail that kind of contains the imagery data that you've just uploaded. All right, and it is also on this data details page where you will find any of the processing related errors. One example is, let's say you've uploaded an imagery data source that is missing the geo transformation information, and so on the data details page it will look something like this. You could either process it again if you're very sure that the data source is meant to work. Maybe something went wrong the first time round. If you're not too sure, chances are that your data source could be faulty, and so what you want to do is make sure that it is the correct data source, and once you've made sure that's the case, you can process it again. If you need to change one of the existing files that make up the data set, you can do so. Go back to the previous slide. You have the list of files here. And so if there was some sort of problem with this particular data source, you will see a replace link right here, which you'll be able to make use of to replace one of the files that you think could be faulty that resulted in this error. And so once you've done that, you will be able to reprocess the data set.